the way that you formulated your question before you used the word mimicry, I thought, well, it's a sort of, the question answers itself. When you say, if you have a free energy minimizing system functioning by active inference on the basis of its generative model, et cetera, and it also has affect, you said, then would it be conscious? And I thought, well, if it has affect, yes, of course it's conscious, because as I just said earlier, for me, the most basic form of consciousness is feeling. In other words, affect. I like the word feeling because it leaves one in no doubt that it's something that must be conscious. You can't have a feeling that you don't feel. So affect is a kind of functional term. Feeling is a descriptive term, so if we're using the word affect and feeling synonymously, then such a system that has affect must be conscious. The problem, though, arises exactly with the issue that Carl just raised, which is, the inevitable issue that we have to address early on in a discussion of the kind that we're having today. It is, how would you ever know? How would you know from the functionality of a system whether or not it's conscious? Because consciousness, by definition, is something that can only be observed subjectively. If consciousness is a property of the being of a system, then only the system can register it in a direct empirical way. In other words, actually feel the feelings. And as Carl said, we can't be sure that each other are conscious. We can only be sure that each of us is, for that very reason. But now I'd like to pause for a moment and say, come on, let's not be silly. It's only philosophers say things like this. I can't be sure that Tevin Naidu is conscious, for heaven's sake. In reality, I don't doubt it for a moment. I can't know it as an absolute, empirically, demonstrably, observably true fact, but it's absurd to doubt it. And I would say it's absurd to doubt consciousness in certainly all mammals and certainly all vertebrates, because it is such a reasonable inference from my own experience and from what I know about the mechanistic basis of my own experience. What I know about the mechanistic basis of my own experience is that, because I believe all human beings, the three of us, are all conscious. What is it that makes us all human beings? Well, Carl says, well, we behave like each other, we look like each other, and so on. But, scientifically, more to the point is the fact that we all have the same structures in our brains that we know empirically in the case of humans on the basis of all sorts of methods. We know that if you lesion that, it will produce a coma. If you stimulate that, it will produce an intense state of arousal with affective quality. These things have been demonstrated time and time again. Therefore, I start on the absolutely reasonable assumption that any other creature with the same anatomical infrastructure, that it's going to have the same functionality as me. Its behavior suggests it, just on ordinary naturalistic behavior. But more interestingly, I can make predictions, and I can say, because I know that stimulation of this in human beings produces intensely negative affective experiences, I predict that if I stimulate this in that creature, it's going to avoid the stimulus. And conversely, with those that produce intensely, and the prediction is confirmed is upheld every time. So the answer, the scientific answer by the ordinary scientific method, in other words, falsifiable predictions, it's confirmed every time. The problem starts for me. Let me pause. Sorry, I'm probably over elaborating this, but this is such a fundamental thing, this problem of other minds issue to our whole discussion. Even that, what I've said so far, it's amazing how many people are skeptical. Neuroscientists are skeptical about consciousness in some other mammals, and consciousness in even more of them, in all vertebrates. They're very dubious about it. Many colleagues. When I have absolutely no hesitation. I have as little hesitation as I have about whether Tevin and Carl are conscious. I have as little hesitation as to whether a zebrafish is conscious, because it's got the same anatomy. The crucial anatomy is there, and when you intervene, the predictions that you expect, the behavioral outcomes that you expect are always confirmed. But even there's what I'm going to just call prejudice. It's anthropocentric prejudice, or primate-centric prejudice, or something like that. That's the nub of the matter, because as soon as you move beyond vertebrates, and there's some very good candidates for consciousness beyond vertebrates, like, for example, the octopus is the creature that is most commonly invoked in this context. But if you look at the literature, there's pretty good evidence that a lot of invertebrates might be conscious, but the prejudices are enormous. And from this point onwards, once we go beyond vertebrates, I think that the problem is not only prejudice; it's also that you lose the obvious grounds for testing predictions by homology, because they don't have homologous anatomy, or their anatomy is it's much more questionable whether these are true homologs of the crucial structures in humans. And so you've got to start using other criteria. And so it ends up becoming functional criteria. And how are we going to agree on what are the functional criteria by which to measure this question, or to decide this question? Because the functional criteria vary depending on your particular mechanistic understanding of how consciousness works, what consciousness is. So the best we can do there is we have to, in advance, and when I say the best we can do, I mean if we're going to follow ordinary scientific method, the best we can do is agree a reasonable number of experts would have to agree in advance on a reasonable set of criteria by which they would say, if you meet X number, or if your system meets X number of these criteria, then we're going to have to give it the benefit of the doubt. And it has to be done in advance, because that's as close as you can come to what I was saying about the paradigm of falsifiable predictions. These are no longer predictions from anatomical homology, but rather predictions from reasonable functionalist and what behaviors you would expect on the basis of reasonable functionalist assumptions. So I think that's the best we can do. But to come now finally to the question of mimicry, I think that there are two things that I want to say. The one is, maybe they're the same thing. The one is that, forgive me for invoking authority, but even as pertinent an authority in this context as Tom Nagel says, an affective zombie is an impossibility. That any system that has the functional mechanisms that generate affect, because, as I said, for me, affect and feeling are the same thing. Happily, Nagel agrees. That if you have the functional mechanisms that generate feeling, then you can't have those without feeling. So it's just like it's a self-contradictory argument. I know where Chalmers is coming from when he talks about zombies, but affective zombies I think it's not quite the same thing. You can't say that a thing that has that functional architecture and displays all the behaviors that go with affect, you can't say that it's a zombie, because affect is perforce felt. That's the function we're talking about here, is the function that generates feeling. If you have that function, it has to come along with feeling. And so to make my second point, which, as I say, may be the same point, I don't see how you can mimic if you have. It's a question. If you instantiate that architecture, that it's reasonable to believe is the mechanistic basis for whereby feelings are generated, then having such a mechanism is not mimicking what we have. It is instantiating what we have. And so, I would, and it all boils down again to what we said at the very beginning, that conscious states are felt. And so, if you're generating an affect, you're generating something, the measure of which is from the viewpoint of the system, that mechanism feels like something.